So, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of the CFO 4.0 podcast. So, with me today, I have Sara Daw, who is the co-founder and group CEO at the CFO Center and the Liberti Group. So, welcome, Sara. Lovely to have you on the show.
Yes, thanks for having me, Hannah. It's great to be here.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your journey to founding the CFO Center?
Well, it all started actually when I was looking to grow a family, have a family, and also be mum, but also have a career. Um, I had worked for Deloitte and qualified as a chartered accountant, done corporate finance. I'd worked in industry with L'Oreal. I'd done an MBA at the London Business School. So I had all these skills. Yet the firms that wanted to take me on after doing my MBA were the investment banks. You know, I was a CA with an MBA, so I was perfect for them. And actually, corporate was just not where I wanted to go, because what I had found was that I just couldn't work out how to bring up a family and have a really, really fulfilling career at the same time. I didn't think that was possible in corporate. I think having one child may be manageable, two tricky, three pretty impossible. So I was really looking. I was just looking around for something to do, and it is a really weird story. Actually, I was taking a flight back from Italy with my daughter. It was our first solo flight. She was quite small, my first daughter, and I was that mum on the plane where you've got a screaming baby, and you're coming down the aisle and everyone's looking at you, and the people are looking down. They just don't want me to sit next to them, and quite frankly, I don't blame them. But I was struggling to find somewhere to sit, and then this lady, this woman came along, and she grabbed my daughter out of my arms with a big smile, started playing with her, let me settle in. And I sat next to her and we got talking. And it turns out that she was a very remarkable businesswoman. She was a non-exec director on a portfolio basis for large UK retailers, all household names, everyone would know them. And she inspired me to start thinking about portfolio. It was that thought that she planted with me then. We became friends, and I then started hearing about portfolio and part-time FD, finance director, as it was back then. We're all CFOs now, but same thing. And I started to think I could be a part-time CFO, part-time FD. I mean, this is over 20 years ago. And so I set myself up. I thought I'll work for some local businesses, SMEs, a couple of days a week. They don't need and can't afford my skills full time, but they still need the skill set on an ongoing basis, but maybe 1 day a week for one client, 2 days a week for another, day a month for another. So I thought I could do that a few days a week and be mum a few days a week, and I could work relatively locally. So that's what got me going. And there was just one problem in that I didn't want to do it on my own. I'm a team player. I thought I might be lonely. So I started looking around for who else was doing this. And it was a brand new concept then, so there weren't many. But I found this website called the FD Center. And I rang up and left a message. And Colin Mills, is the original founder of the FD Center, he'd spotted this gap in the market a few years earlier. He'd set up the FD Center. He called me back straight away. I met him the next day. We got on. I joined up, and then off we went. So that's how it happened.
Oh wow. And I guess having both done the job and obviously managing a whole team of CFOs out there, how do you think that the role has changed in the last 10 years? Is it different, or do you feel the same problems are there that were 10 years ago?
Very much the same problems. So when we started back in the early 2000s, so it was sort of 2005 when I started with the FD Center. When we started back then, quite frankly, no one knew what part-time FD was. They were quite confident around the word interim, around it being, when people are going full time for a set piece of time to do a project and then leave. But part-time's quite different in that it's where individuals go in on a long-term basis, and are the CFO for that business, but they just do it as the need arises. As I say, 1 day a week, 2 days a month, and that concept was really quite alien back then. No one really knew what part-time was. We had to do a lot of education of the concept. And they also certainly had never heard of the word fractional, which is now what's being used. And there were some early adopters. Entrepreneurs really liked it when they see it. They love the fact that they can have their issues solved. It's a way to get skills into their business to scale. So I feel that how it's changed is that more and more CFOs have gravitated towards this way of working because they are perhaps disillusioned with corporate life and want to live and work differently, want to take back control of their lives. So I think what's happened is more have come into the space, and COVID's accelerated that, I think, as well. And then it's become more normalized to have this concept. So whilst I would say there are more businesses with fractional and part-time CFOs now, I would also say I still meet regularly many, many businesses that have never even heard of the concept. So I still feel we're just at the beginning. Yet it is taking off as a concept for sure.
And in terms of the problems that a part-time or fractional CFO solves versus somebody that's more full-time, is there any difference, or is it the same sort of role profile?
So I think it is the role of the CFO, and I think the part-time CFOs would take responsibility for finance, would own finance, lead and design it. I think what's important when part-time is firstly to remember that if you're working with an SME that's growing, they don't need the skills all the time because the businesses just aren't so much complex as a bigger business, a big corporate, and therefore it is possible to do it on a part-time basis. So it is the same categories of activities. They're just not quite so involved, I think, as when an individual's full-time. And what also I notice with businesses that are slightly larger is that the CFO sort of scope of the role does creep, perhaps as well. And CFOs probably end up sort of picking up more things outside of their swim lane when the business is bigger because they're there and they're full time. Whereas I think when individuals are part time and they're really laser focused on where they can deliver the very best value, it forces the decision to concentrate on those things and not pick up things that perhaps others can do. And so I feel the critical part when you're part-time is to make sure that the design of the CFO function is very much in tune with what the organizations need, and that the other team members in the finance function are doing all the right roles, and the CFO very much stays in that sort of head of the role, perhaps overseeing all the operations, getting the right people to do the operations, managing the relationships with the outside providers, and then very much heading up the strategy. So I think it forces some great decisions around keeping the CFO in their swim lane. But I do see it as very possible.
And do you see that there's a difference are there any differences in skills required to be a part-time CFO versus a full-time? In terms
Yes.
of apart from obviously being able to have that conversation around, staying in your swim lane, as it were.
Yeah, so I think this is the nub of the issue, really. So a lot of CFOs think, and a lot of senior leaders think across the C-suite when they want to enter the fractional world, that it's the same as what they did in corporate, perhaps, or what they did in larger businesses. And whilst I've just said the role is the same, and of course the skills that they've got from being in those bigger businesses will be invaluable. There's no doubt about that. They will be invaluable. All of these SME businesses want to get to big. They want to have someone that knows what it's like to feel big. They want someone on board who can guide them to get there, bring in all the skills they need. So from that element, yes, it's very similar, but the difference is that this individual then is self-employed. They are building their own portfolio of clients. to work with. So they have to learn the skills to find those clients, start working with those clients, so win the engagement, and then ongoing build the relationships to keep them. They also need to make sure that they can manage relationships remotely really well. I think COVID came along and helped us quite a lot with that, and gave us the sort of sharp shock of how to do that. But that's really important. And I think what's also incredibly important, the whole thing for me is about relationships. I think the technical skills are the table stakes. So that's a given. And there are plenty of CFOs out there that are good CFOs, and you just need those to get in the door. The real killer app is building the relationships with the clients and the entrepreneurs, and getting on their page, building that relationship where they feel confident enough and secure enough, those entrepreneurs, to confide in the CFO, to share their problems, their dreams, their aspirations, things that they probably don't tell other people about their business, and they don't want to share perhaps in their business with their direct employees. And we have to create that space and that safety and that intimacy to be able to have those conversations. And I don't think that comes naturally to too many people. And so I think that is where the real skill comes in becoming a part-time CFO, managing that portfolio and balancing all the different relationships, the different skill set, the different life cycle stages of the businesses, the different cultures, the different people, the different sectors. It's quite a challenge.
Absolutely. I guess with smaller businesses as well, is the ask from the CFO any different in terms of what they need? If we think about the typical CFO role, what are the current challenges that a typical fractional CFO would address for their clients?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say a lot of businesses, they don't know they need a part-time CFO to start with, but they've got problems in their businesses or opportunities that they want to take advantage of. So normally they're facing issues that they haven't faced before, or that they haven't got a solution for in-house. And it may be they just are not, they're not making the profits they want. Their cash flow, they haven't got visibility of their cash flow. They perhaps want to go overseas and expand into new markets and go international as an SME, which we know is all possible, but still quite complex. They might need to get their processes, systems up to speed. They might need to bring AI into their business, all the DE&I as well, the sustainability initiatives as well. And they may never have done any of this before. So it's normally those sorts of things, those hooks, where they're researching how they can solve those problems. And that's what part-time CFOs would normally go in to address. And the idea would be to then review the finance function and get the operations working, the engine of the business working, and optimize so that there's enough cash there's enough profitability. The reporting is forward-looking. The KPIs are all in place. Now, that may mean with these smaller businesses that these CFOs have to get their hands dirty more, perhaps, than when they were in corporate. And they might need to dig in to see how everything works in that organization to start with. The key thing then, though, is that's not a valuable solution going forward. That role will be too expensive for part-time CFOs to do ongoing. So then it's to backfill and train in and recruit individuals in the team to make sure that all works, bring in the right systems and processes to support that, various tools, etc. And then I think once they've got that working, the key thing would be then to work with the business owner on their strategy. So marrying up the financial strategy to support the business strategy, looking at the risks, phasing, building the plan for the future, and also making sure the strategic funding's in place to do that, taking everything from operations and then bridging any gaps. And that would be the typical scenario. And the idea is, I believe with entrepreneurs, they get into business because they're really good at something. They're good at relationships, they're good at inventing something, they've got a mission, they've got a purpose. Maybe they want to eradicate single-use plastic. I mean, whatever it might be. And often we find when we engage with them, they've lost sight of that. They've lost sight of that because they've got caught up in the running of the day-to-day. And I think a part-time CFO can really unburden them and get them to relax a bit more around the running of their business, and that the finances are secure and managed, and then take them into that space again where they're looking forward and getting to where they want to go, for themselves, their families, and their people in their business, and really realize their dreams again. And I think that changing lives piece is where this fractional model can really come into its own.
And you mentioned obviously the aim of the game is to get into that financial strategy piece with those entrepreneurs and owners. So how does that financial strategy piece change with a smaller business versus a big corporate? How do you see that?
So I think the CFOs in the part-time roles working with the smaller business will be at the sharp end of business. And I think that's a big reason why they want to come in to work with these smaller organizations, in that when you're in a corporate, you can get sort of further and further away from perhaps what the business does. The teams get bigger and bigger, and it's about project managing, it's mobilizing big workforces, leading initiatives, yes. But I think the difference with the SME world is that the CFO is much closer to the coalface and seeing the results of their endeavors much more quickly, good or bad. And it's real money, real lives, real cash. And I think that is quite a difference. So I think the speed can be quite interesting. Obviously, they've got less resources as well to work with in SMEs. So I think the other side of it is, to be strategic, you have to get more creative with the SME, building strategies that are way more creative, to borrow, create partnerships to build strategies that work. And I feel that I feel it's a bit more of an alive environment to be in compared to perhaps the bigger corporates, where I think perhaps maybe they will be working with much bigger teams of people, and probably dealing with similar problems, but on a much bigger scale. I also feel that the CFOs in the SMEs will probably work with the business owner on more general business issues as well, as not just finance. So the individuals that often go into this world have got a lot of good business experience. They may have held non-finance board positions in the past, and they can bring those wider skill sets to work alongside the entrepreneur as well as the bringing the best practice around finance. So I think it can actually be quite a broad mentoring role, as well as just delivering on finance.
And how, I guess, just to dig into, there's loads of things I want to ask you based on that piece, but just, you talked about creative strategies. Could you give some examples of where you've seen creative strategies in play? So maybe perhaps something you've done or something one of your team has done to sort of find an interesting or different workaround to what is a traditional problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be around perhaps partnering. So realizing that an organization may not have the wherewithal or the resources themselves to do something strategically themselves, but perhaps they could partner with their supply chain to build up the skills in that way, as opposed to doing it directly themselves. So I do feel that entrepreneurs are good networkers. They generally know the people in their sector quite well. And I think they're also not afraid to ask for favors and to perhaps learn off other businesses. So I think it's not just sort of formally partnering. I think it's also perhaps using other organizations to help them out. So if I give an example, that I know that we do in our organization, would be that we would help businesses that we work with in the way we serve them, we would help them just soft land in a new country, without, that would be something that we would do just because we want to help them out, not because we're working for them. But if they wanted to perhaps set up in a new country, we would introduce them to all the people we knew in that country to soft land and get going. And that would be that would just be through relationship and being, creative, as opposed to it being something that's, part of the offering as such.
And you mentioned obviously that it's important to hand over the finance operations. So I guess that obviously means developing and building the staff, the finance team that's sort of sitting behind you. How do you find balancing that when you're only in sort of 1 to 2 days a week? Is there any secrets to success when you're not necessarily in full time to supporting those staff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think before COVID, that was a bigger question, because before COVID, for the many, many years before then, I think our business model, the people operating this fractional business model, were the odd ones out when they were working with organizations, because they were the ones that were going in 1 day a week or 2 days a month, while most of the employees would be in the office. And so there was that divide going on. However, since COVID, it's become normalized for us not to work in our offices, for most businesses to have some sort of hybrid model working. And that has completely normalized the fact. And I think entrepreneurs through COVID had also realized, and team members through COVID have also realized, that we don't have to be sat next to each other in an office to do great work together. We have to deliberately carve out time to collaborate, but that can be done physically face to face or not, and it still works. So I feel that working remotely has come on a long way since then. However, you've still got the point that perhaps the team will be working full time in a business and we would be working part time. So there's still that piece to overcome, and that goes back to relationships. So the key thing, and I think the most important relationships in a business for any fractional CFO would be obviously the business owner or the leader of the business that we're working with, but also the finance team. And we're there, and the fractional CFOs are there to make that finance team look really good and to support them and mentor them and be that safety net for their work, and being that ear for them, that perhaps if they haven't had that leader before, they haven't had, and they're often very grateful for the leadership, for the mentoring, for the training, for the development that these fractional CFOs can bring, and the insight. And it provides that link between finance and the board, and finance and the entrepreneur. So I feel in most cases, it's very much welcomed, obviously, if done in the right way and trust is built, and everyone who's, the CFO that's shown up there has shown that they're, committed to really supporting the team and helping them, and for everyone to, benefit from it. So obviously it depends on the way it's gone about, but I think it can be a real bonus for organizations to have, this leadership in it that maybe they would never have had before.
And you mentioned obviously COVID changed the way that we work, so the shift to online, and you've mentioned the increase in part-time. But how have you seen the CFO role itself evolve over the last couple of years? Has that changed?
Yes, yeah, I think so. So, when I look at large organizations, which I have, and the way they're responding to complexity. And obviously there's a lot of complexity in the world. We've got, a lot of change. We've got automation, we've got digitalization, we've got climate, we've got energy, we've got political instability. So there's a lot going on for organizations. The pace of change is fast. And the CFO role, in my view, is being expected to deal with a lot of things. And if I look at the job descriptions of CFOs, there's a lot on the list. So they're expected to have social skills to mobilize workforces. They're expected to have leadership skills to lead the finance function and be a master in the finance function and have all technology at their fingertips 24/7 and be up to date with the latest technology. But they're also expected to have these convergent and divergent mindsets so that they can, have integrative thinking where they're able to sit in the uncomfortableness of ambiguity and all this change, and come up with better solutions. And that's an elevation of mindset that I believe only about 15% of individuals at work have got anyway. So when I look at the job descriptions, I think that corporates are actually looking for superhumans, and I'm not sure those people exist. And that is what is piled into the finance function and other C-suite roles, I might add. And so on the one hand, you've got the corporates expecting a lot from individuals, from a single individual or a fixed group of people at the C-suite. And their response to it, quite interestingly, at the larger organizational level, and I've done a lot of research around this, their response to it is that they're building out more and more C-suite roles within a function. So not only are we having the CFO at the board level and the executive level, but there's families of C-suite within that finance function. There's data officers, there's compliance officers, there's internal audit, there's risk. And actually, if we look at, and I've done a look at the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 250, there are over 50 C-suite titles now on Wikipedia describing all the C-suite roles. There are also at least for every sort of board level C-suite function, there's and staff member, there's another they have to manage about 8 other C-suite titles, which means you've got hierarchies and families going on. So what I'm seeing is that the response in corporate is to increase more headcount, more rigidity in a way to the finance function and other C-suite functions, and complexity. And potentially there are too many chiefs going on there. From the outside in, who's in charge of who here? It's really quite difficult to work it out. And I'm not sure that everyone, how it works internally either. And my view is that that's too rigid a structure to be dealing with the complexity and change and the way we need to be fleet of foot and dynamic in dealing with all this complex change. And so I believe that actually the access economy, which is where organizations dip into working with fractional and CFOs that are self-employed, they can bring in skill sets and specialist skill sets into these organizations to do projects, to do part-time roles, to do mentoring, to try out new initiatives and cover off a lot of this, of these rigid structures, what they would be doing. And it's a different way of sort of thinking about how we organize ourselves in the C-suite. The C-suite function hasn't been looked at since the 80s and 90s, and academia seem to think of it as a static concept, whereas I think asking a fixed group to do it is rather outdated now and doesn't sort of fit with the pace of change we're facing. So that's how I think the C-suite roles and the CFO function will change over time, is to think of it as a more dynamic concept and use the access economy and the fractional world to resource it.
So does that mean that you'll have more interim roles or part-time roles within finance moving forwards, do you think?
I think so, because I think that if you forget the roles and look at the work that needs doing and spec it out from the needs of the business, it's nothing, not all of it fits into a nice, neat, full-time C-suite role of that specialism. And what then happens is, to fill the role, organizations then let they sort of pile more things in that weren't normally be in that role, but we have to make it that role because we've got a full-time person sitting there. We have to fill them up. So I'm thinking that actually, if we can start thinking of the future of work and the future of the fractional C-suite, another way of doing it to support perhaps group CFOs would be to give them access to this C-suite economy of fractionals who are out there in the marketplace and who can bring in the specialist skills that they need that are absolutely on point for that particular problem at that particular time. They can wind up, they can peak, they can wind down, and they may come back again another time to do something else. But it gives a very much more sort of fit for purpose way of running a finance function. And it, and over time, as perhaps an area develops, perhaps first outsource it, get it done. But once it develops and becomes business as usual, then perhaps backfill it into full time. Rather than go there straight away and have all your eggs in one basket, recruit a person, which takes quite a long time. You've got to make sure you get the right person. Because the other beauty of the access economy is that you can go easy in and easy out with roles. Recruitment of a C-suite person, if you get it wrong, could be 2 years of time and cost, and you would make very little progress. Whereas in the access economy, you will know within a month or two whether you've got the right person. And if you haven't, you can change it. And so it's very, 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 very flexible, which I think is, really good for current times.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, or we talked a lot about the DEI and sort of the increase in a lot of the other initiatives. How do you see that falling within the CFO's remit, or do you feel like it's you mentioned obviously different C-suite types. Do you think it's somewhere else or standalone?
No, I think it's integrated for sure. So, if you take AI, for instance, we would need to use AI to optimize the finance function for starters. So within the business, and using it within the finance function, obviously collaborating with the tech leaders in the business, and how the organization wants to digitalize and automate. But I think, the finance function has to play its part there and learn how to use automation effectively. And then I also think it's in there's an element of risk around bringing in automation and AI. And I think that definitely sits perhaps with, the CFO function and because there are financial implications for that, and the risk management function of the business. And then, of course, there's any go-to-market strategies as well that the organisation wants to use automation, and finance should be all over that in terms of how that's going to increase productivity in the organisation, and what's the impact of that on the finances and the numbers, and how's that resourced and costed and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I think it's an integrated approach. I don't think finance sits there alone dealing with it, and nor does tech. I think it has to be, for full effectiveness, I have to think it has to be a whole group strategy, and the CFO will play a large part in building out the ROI for that and managing the risk on it as well. I think there's a big gap at the moment, and what I'm seeing is with automation AI, everyone's very excited about it, and we're all experimenting, but I don't think we've really understood yet how to fully use it in our organizations in a way that's optimized, that's risk managed. There's still a gap there, but we'll get there.
Absolutely. I have a lot of conversations around that. And it's still bleeding edge. I think we just it will soon become cutting edge, but it's still at that early stages. But it's an exciting realm to play in.
I was just going to say that on that last point around the, sorry to interrupt, but on that last point, the beauty of the fractional model is that because many CFOs would have other clients, they have got a very much wider perspective about what's going on in the marketplace, new tools that are being used. They've got I think they can be a real source of innovation and bringing outside perspectives in to organizations that you won't get when you've got an internal finance team and an internal CFO. Because my experience is that you've got to make a real effort where, if you're a full-time CFO in an organization, to go out and look at new things. And often we tend to look inwards because for inspiration. And if we're not making that effort, then that organization, I think, is losing out. Whereas that's just a natural inbuilt part of the fractional model, because they have other clients. So there's a real source of learning that they can bring in, latest trends, what's working, what's not, what other clients are doing, obviously respecting confidentiality, but they can bring that to all their organizations in concept terms, which I think is a massive value to that way of working for organizations, especially in times of change. Because in COVID, I mean, there were so many businesses coming to us in COVID asking for help and what everyone else was doing. So in times of change, I think this model really comes into its own, because it's where it sees what's going on in the marketplace first before others.
Absolutely. And is your perspective similar for ESG? How do you see that fitting into the CFO role?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I mean, obviously, I think there's standards coming into the role that have to be adopted, and I think some countries are ahead of others. And again, with some CFO models like ours, there's an international aspect. So again, that's a way of tapping into that earlier, perhaps, than other organizations might, because the organization has that global perspective. So I feel that, with ESG, these sorts of initiatives, perhaps that one more than most, probably, I think, is something that corporates probably took on first, perhaps before the SME community, and it's filtering down. Obviously, those businesses that want to make strides in that area in the SME community and in the entrepreneurial space have done so, and their fleet of foot around it. And also the ones that are in supply chains of bigger organizations have had to get with the program a lot more quickly. So I feel that that is beginning to really integrate ESG. Again, there's still complexity around it, and I think there's still a lot of areas where it's unproven, which is the exact path to go down. But I think definitely that's coming into the SME community now. And another thing that I see, just sort of on a similar topic, is equality, DE&I, equity, diversity, equity, inclusion. I see, gender balance being another way that this model can work quite well, because I do see a demand for businesses to increase their gender balance in their organizations, and they can often do that by engaging with individuals from the C-suite, from the access economy, to fill those gaps. And I do see a demand for that as well.
And I guess, if our listeners are here and they're thinking, oh, the fractional world sounds interesting, what kind of questions could they ask themselves to understand if fractional potentially could be a route that they should explore? Is there sort of ways that you can identify whether you're ready to make that shift from big corporate to fractional small business?
Yeah, I mean, the drivers tend to be wanting freedom of choice. So individuals who want to take control of their agenda, perhaps they've got something going on in their lives where they need more flexibility in their lives. So it could be, caring for others. It could be elderly parents. It could be for children or someone else in their lives. It could be that they have a passion that they want to take hold of and take further. It could be that they just want to have that feeling of agency, where their life is their own, and perhaps they're traveling too much in corporate. Perhaps they leave on Mondays, come back on Fridays, and that's taking its toll. It could be they want more variety over what they do. So perhaps they want to work with different businesses. perhaps they want to stay in their swim lane more and only work with scale-up organizations, or only work in a certain sector or on a certain specialist function within finance. These are all things that can be very much part of the fractional world. Essentially, they can design the work that they want to do, the different sectors, the different life cycle stages of business, different cultures they want to work in. So there's way more sort of job crafting going on here, where they can really gain purpose and meaning in their role because they're able to build it how they want it. Now, that sounds wonderful, and why wouldn't anyone want to do it? There are issues with doing that. So going self-employed, the things they need to think about are how they're going to finance that runway, if you like, of getting going in the portfolio world. So, they need some savings. They need perhaps to be supported by someone else. They need to think about giving themselves a year of funding. Now, that doesn't mean they won't earn in a year. They absolutely will, but it will be start off not earning at the start and then gradually building up. So they need to weather that period. And I think that's really, really important, because then you can take the pressure off. If you've got a year, that's time, and that gives everyone a bit of breathing space to really think about how they build their portfolios. I would say the other thing they need to do is make sure that they've got their nearest and dearest really supporting them, because it is a change of career. I think people think going into portfolio is, oh, I'm a CFO, I can do that. Well, and we've spoken about this already. It's about the skills of finding and winning and keeping and building a portfolio and having a relationship. It's not the same. So I think the more individuals think about it as future-proofing their careers for the rest of their lives, they can go into this all the way into retirement. And actually, they'll always be able to access the market if they learn these skills. So it's a wonderful place to be. But because of that, it takes investment of time and savings to live off, and effort. So they've got to really want it. They've got to, have that money to support them. They need to have the support of their family. You don't want, your nearest and dearest saying to you, when are you going to get a proper job? Which is definitely what I had in my early days, because this is a very valuable and, proper way of living and working. And the beauty of this model is once an individual's got a portfolio of 5 clients, say, they're on the journey with 5 businesses. There's an emotional connection there. It's a really lovely place to be, really invested in these organizations. We're highly committed because we want to be there. We've chosen to be there. And it means that also we've got income security rather than job security. So we've diversified our risk across 5 businesses. It's very unlikely we're going to lose 5 businesses overnight in some sort of COVID or sector crash. It's just not going to happen as much as in one particular role. So there's way more security in it once it's built. So most of the issues at that front end, and that will be where I'd say for individuals, is to really think about it and to prepare in advance, research it, get to know people in that industry, talk to people that are already doing it, get the money put aside, and think about how they want their life to be, because they're redesigning their life.
Yeah, no, absolutely loads for people to think about. And like you say, it's a genuine career change, not just the same role in part-time, as it were. So, well, thank you so much, Sara, for sharing your knowledge, experience, and what you're seeing, not just in obviously the fractional CFO world, but across the board. And if people want to learn more about the work you're doing at the CFO Center, or more about life in fractional roles, where can they find you? Where can they learn more?
Okay, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Sara Daw. I have the CFO Center website is www.cfocenter.com. It's part of the Liberti Group, www.thelibertigroup.com. And I also have my own website, saradaw.com. So plenty of ways to get in touch and find out more.
Fantastic. As always, for our listeners, we will pop those links in the show notes. A massive thank you, Sara, for joining me on the show today. And if you as listeners have questions, have follow-ups, have other topics you'd like to cover around the world of fractional CFO, then please do reach out. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do send me a message, leave a review. It all helps us with promoting and sharing the CFO 4.0 podcast globally. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Sara, for joining, and I'll see you next time on the CFO podcast.
Brilliant. Thank you.